I keep telling myself I'm going to read from my books and record it, and I keep putting it off because I know nothing is ever going to be as good as I want it to be. I am a hopeless perfectionist who knows he can't be perfect, so he ends up just being a hopeless procrastinator. If it can't be 100%, everything ends up being 0%. And that's kind of what my life has been, actually. You make everything all or nothing, all you ever get is nothing. That about sums it up. So it's just gonna be what it is. I'm sure it'll be crap. Also because of the, it's hard for me to read out loud. I get tired very quick because I run out of air. Because of the dust and my sinuses. And that's because I live here. I'm not sure if I want to start at chapter 3 or 4. I think I started in 4. Sitchin has a bad habit of not putting things chronologically. Also, I don't know about these books, it'd be a bit remedial for me. I'm fairly well accustomed to the information, Sitchin's information. This is the book, There Were Giants Upon the Earth, Chapter 4, Sumer, where civilization began. Sumer, it is now known, was the land of a talented and dexterous people in what is now southern Iraq, usually depicted in artful statues and statuettes in a devotional stance. It was the Sumerians who were the first ones to record and describe past events and tell the tales of their gods. Wow, it supports his theory to say that, but they keep finding older sites of older civilizations. I have not heard of any writing in those civilizations, so Sumer may well be the first that had a developed writing system, and in fact it was quite crude with it's not even cuneiform. Everybody seems to think Sumerians had cuneiform, but they actually had pictographs, which later became cuneiform. Cuneiform was a stylized version of the pictograph. It was there in the fertile plain watered by the great Euphrates and Tigris rivers that mankind's first known civilization blossomed out some 6,000 years ago, suddenly, unexpectedly, with stunning abruptness. According to all scholars, it was a civilization to which we owe to this day virtually every first of what we deem essential to advanced civilization. The wheel and wheeled transportation, the brick that made and still makes possible high-rise buildings. That's not entirely true. I mean, they use steel beams and things now. The brick they use now is just the outer casing for aesthetic purposes. Furnaces in the kiln that are essential to industries from baking to metallurgy, astronomy and mathematics, cities and urban societies, kingship and laws, temples and priesthoods, timekeeping, a calendar, festivals, from beer to culinary recipes. You should have said recipes from beer to culinary. From arts to music to musical instruments, and above all, writing and record keeping. It was all first there in Sumer. We now know all that thanks to the achievements of archaeology and the decipherment of ancient languages during the past century and a half, the long and arduous road by which ancient Sumer moved from complete obscurity to an awed appreciation of its grandeur, has a number of milestones bearing the name of scholars who had made the journey possible. Some who toiled at the varied sites will be mentioned by us. Others who pieced together and classified fragmented artifacts during a century and a half of Mesopotamian archaeology are too many to be listed. And then there were the epigraphers, sometimes out in the field, most of the time poring over tablets in crammed museums or university quarters, whose persistence, devotion, and abilities converted pieces of clay incised with odd cuneates into legible historical, cultural, and literary treasures. Their work was crucial. For a while, the usual pattern of archaeological and ethnographic discoveries has been to find a people's remains and then decipher their written records, if they had them. In the case of the Sumerians, recognition of their language, even its decipherment, preceded the discovery of their land, Sumer, a common English spelling rather than Shumer. And it was not because the language Sumerian preceded its people. On the contrary, it was because the language and its script lingered on after Sumer was long gone, just as Latin and its script had outlived the Roman Empire thousands of years later. The philological recognition of Sumerian began, as we have illustrated, not through the discovery of the Sumerians' own tablets, but through the varied use in Akkadian text of loanwords that were not Akkadian. The naming of gods and cities by names that made no sense in Assyrian or Babylonian, and of course the actual statement, as that of Ashurbanipal, about the existence of earlier writing in Sumerian. His statement was borne out by the discovery of tablets that rendered the same text in two languages, one Akkadian and the other in the mysterious language. Then the next two lines were in Akkadian and in another language, and so on. The scholarly term for such bilingual text is interlinear. It was in 1850 that Edward Hincks, a student of Rawlinson's Fichten's decipherments, suggested in a scholarly essay that an Akkadian syllabary, the collection of some 350 cuneiform signs, each representing a full consonant plus vowel syllable, must have evolved from a prior non-Akkadian set of syllabic signs. The idea, which was not readily accepted, was finally borne out when some of the clay tablets in the Akkadian language libraries turned out to be bilingual syllabaries or dictionaries. List that on one side of the tablet gave a cuneiform sign in the unknown language, and a matching list on the other side in Akkadian, with the sign's pronunciation and meaning added. All at once, archaeology obtained a dictionary of an unknown language. In addition to tablets inscribed as a kind of dictionary, the so-called syllabaries, various other bilingual tablets served as invaluable tools in deciphering the Sumerian writing and language. In 1869, Jules Oppert, addressing the French Society of Numismatics and Archaeology, pointed out that the royal title of King of Sumer and Akkad, found on some tablets, provided the name of the people who had preceded the Akkadian-speaking Assyrians and Babylonians. They were, he suggested, the Sumerians. The designation had not been applied ever since, or has been applied ever since, although to this day museums and the media prefer to name their exhibits or title their articles and programs Babylonian, or at best Old Babylonian, rather than the unfamiliar Sumerian. Though virtually everything that we consider essential to a developed civilization has been inherited from the Sumerians, many people still respond with the blank "who?" question when they hear the word Sumerian. The interest in Sumer and the Sumerians constituted a chronological as well as a geographical shift from the 1st to 2nd millennia BC to the 3rd and 4th millennia BC, and from north and central Mesopotamia to the south. That ancient settlements lay buried there was indicated not only by the numerous mounds that were scattered over the flat mudlands, mounds that resulted from layers of habitats built upon layers called strata of the remains of previous habitats. More intriguing were old artifacts that local tribesmen dug up out of the mounds, showing them to the occasional European visitors. What we know now is the result of almost 150 years of archaeological toil that brought to light, to varying degrees, Sumer's 14 or so major ancient centers, virtually all of which are mentioned in the ancient text. Systematic field archaeology of Sumer is deemed to have begun in 1877 by Ernest de Sarzeck, who was then the French vice-consul in Basra, Iraq's southern port city on the Persian Gulf. Rumors at the time were that, having been fascinated by the local trade in finds, his real interest was in finding objects for private sale. He started excavating at a site locally called Tello, the mound. The finds there were so great, and they did go to the Louvre Museum in Paris, where they fill up galleries, and so inexhaustible that French archaeological teams kept coming back year after year to this one site for more than 50 years, through 1933. Tello turned out to be the sacred precinct, the Girsu, of a large Sumerian urban center called Lagash. Archaeological strata indicated that it had been continuously settled almost since 3800 BC. Sculpted wall reliefs dating from a so-called early dynastic period, stone sculptures bearing inscriptions in immaculate Sumerian cuneiform, and a beautiful silver vase presented by a king named Entemena to his god, attested the high level of Sumerian culture millennia ago. To top it all, more than 10,000 inscribed clay tablets were found in the city's library, the importance of which will be discussed later on. Some inscriptions and text named a continuous line of kings of Lagash who reigned from circa 2900 BC to 2250 BC, an uninterrupted reign of almost 7 centuries. Clay tablets and commemorative stone plaques recorded large construction undertakings, irrigation and canal projects, and named the kings who initiated them. There was trade with distant cities and even conflicts with nearby cities. Most astounding were the statues and inscriptions of a king named Gudea, circa 2400 BC, in which he describes the miraculous circumstances leading to the building of a complex temple for the god Girsu and the god's spouse Thou. The task detailed later on involved divine instructions given in Twilight Zone circumstances, astronomical alignments, elaborate architecture, the importation of rare building materials from distant lands, calendrial know-how, and precise rituals, all taking place some 4,300 years ago. The Lagash discoveries have been summed up by its last French excavator André Perrault in his book Hello, 1948. A few miles northwest of the mounds of Lagash, a mound locally called Tel El Medina was located. The French excavators of Lagash peeked at it too, and there was not much to excavate, for the ancient city that had been there was at some time completely destroyed by fire. A few finds, however, helped identify that ancient city as Bad Sabira. The ancient city's name, Bad Sabira, meant the metalworking fort. As other discoveries clarified, Bad Sabira was indeed considered to have been a metalworking city. A decade after the Sarsak began excavations at Lagash, a new major archaeological player joined the effort to uncover Sumer, the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. It had been known from preceding finds in Mesopotamia that the most important religious center in Sumer was a city called Nippur. In 1887, John Peters, a professor of Hebrew at the university, succeeded in lining up academic support at the university and financial support from individual donors to organize an archaeological expedition to Iraq to find Nippur. The location of Nippur seemed easy to guess, the geographical center of southern Mesopotamia. A can't-be-missed huge mound rising some 65 feet above the mudplain was called Nefar by the locals. It fitted references to ancient Nippur as navel of the earth. The University of Pennsylvania's expedition conducted 4 excavation campaigns at the site from 1888 to 1900. At first under the direction of John Peters, then under the leadership of Hermann Helfrich, a German-born Assyriologist of international standing. Nippur, the archaeologists ascertained, had been continuously settled from the 6th millennium BC to about 800 AD. The excavations focused at first on the city's sacred precinct, whose location, as incredible as it may sound, was indicated on a millennia-old city map inscribed on a large clay tablet. There, the remains of a high-rising ziggurat or step pyramid in the city's sacred precinct attested its dominance above the city. Called E-Kor, house which is like a mountain, it was the main temple dedicated to Sumer's leading god Enlil, Lord of the Command, and his spouse Ninlil, Lady of the Command. The temple inscription stated, including the inner chamber in which tablets of destinies were kept. According to several texts, the chamber was the heart of the Duran Key, or bond heaven earth, a command and control center of the gods, Enlil that connected earth with the heavens. The expedition's finds at Nippur, deemed by some to be of unparalleled importance, included the discovery of nearly 30,000 inscribed clay tablets, or fragments thereof, in a library of what had apparently been a special scribal and science quarter of the city, adjoining the sacred precinct. He is describing here one of the locations of what may be the Tower of Babel, calling it the Duran Key, the bond of heaven and earth. Elsewhere in his writing, he connects the biblical Enoch with one of the kings, mythical kings, called Enmi Duran Key, or priest of the Duran Key, which would be what possibly could be the oldest form of the word Melchizedek. It's my theory that the Duran Key, or the Enmi Duran Key, was the original. The Duran Key was originally the original place where he officiated. The inmate there on key was the original priest. I'm not certain if that was to be the elect of God, the Melchizedek of God at the time, or if it was in fact yet another perversion, like the Shamash was in Babylon. Anyway, it's part of the theory. Helprecht planned to publish no less than 20 volumes with the tablet's most important texts, many with mythological context, others dealing with mathematics and astronomy and dating back to the 3rd millennium BC. Among the Nippur inscriptions that were transcribed, translated, and published was a remnant of the original Sumerian tale of the deluge, naming its Noah counterpart as Ziusudra, equaling his life days are prolonged, the equivalent of the Akkadian Napishtim. In the Sumerian inscription, known to scholars by its reference number CBS 10,673, it is the god Enki who reveals to his faithful follower Ziusudra a secret of the gods, that at the instigation of an angry Enlil, the gods decided to destroy the seed of mankind by the deluge that was about to happen, and Enki, or Kronos, in the Berosus fragments, instructs Ziusudra, which Berosus calls Zisuthros, to build the salvaging boat. But all the expedition's plans were cut short by a spate of accusations by Peters that Helprecht was providing misleading provenances, discovery locations for announced finds, and that Helprecht had made a deal with the Turkish Sultan in Constantinople, today's Istanbul, to send most of the finds there, rather than to the university in Philadelphia, in exchange for the Sultan letting Helprecht keep some finds as gifts for his private collection. The controversy which divided Philadelphia's highest echelons and made headlines in the New York Times raged from 1907 to 1910. A commission of inquiry formed by the university in the end found the accusations of professional misconduct against Helprecht to be unsubstantiated. In effect, many of the Nippur tablets did end up in Constantinople. Helprecht's private collection ended up in Jena, Helprecht's university town in Germany. The University of Pennsylvania, through its archaeological museum, returned to Nippur only after World War II, in a joint expedition with Chicago University's Oriental Institute. The Peters-Helprecht controversy is still regarded by historians as a major disruption of Near Eastern archaeology, but due to the ever-intervening law of unintended consequences, in the end it led to one of the greater advances in Sumerology, for provided the first job to a young epigrapher named Samuel N. Kramer, who then became an outstanding Sumerologist. The excavations at Lagash and Nippur, requiring continuous archaeological efforts year after year after year, revealed the existence of major urban centers in Sumer that rivaled the size of Babylonian and Assyrian sites in the north, even though the ones in Sumer were older by more than 1,000 years. The existence of walled sacred precincts, each with a skyscraping ziggurat, indicated a high level of ancient building technology that preceded and served as a model for the Babylonians and Assyrians. The ziggurats, literally that which rises high, rose in several steps, usually 7, to heights that could reach 90 meters. They were built of two kinds of mud bricks, sun-dried for high-rise cores, and kiln-burned for extra strength for stairways, exteriors, and overhangs. The size, shape, and curvature of the bricks varied to fit their functions, and they were held together with bitumen as mortar. Modern laboratory tests show that kiln-burnt mud bricks are 5-fold times stronger than sun-dried ones. The discovered ziggurats literally confirm the biblical statement of Genesis 11, 1-4 regarding the construction methods of the settlers in Shinar after the deluge. And the whole earth was of one language and one kind of words, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. And they settled there, and they said each one to the other, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And the bricks served them for stone, and bitumen served them for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build us a city, and a tower whose head shall reach the heavens." In lands like Canaan, where stones were used for building and lime is still used as mortar, for they lack bitumen, the reference to bricks and mud and brick-making technologies, burn them thoroughly, and to bitumen, which seeps out of the ground in southern Mesopotamia, represent a remarkably detailed and amazing knowledge of past events in a stoneless land like Sumer. Uncovering ancient Sumer, the archaeologists' spades were corroborating the Bible. Besides the various technological accomplishments of those settlers in the plains between the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, they also included the wheel and wagon, the kiln, metallurgy, medicines, textiles, multicolored apparel, musical instruments. There were countless other firsts of what are still deemed essential aspects of an advanced civilization. They include a mathematical system called sexagesimal, or base 60, that initiated the circle of 360 degrees, timekeeping that divided day and night into 12 double hours, a lunisolar calendar of 12 months, properly intercalated with the 13th leap month, geometry, measurement units of distance, weight and capacity, and advanced astronomy with planetary, star, constellations and zodiacal knowledge, law codes and court of law, irrigation systems, transportation networks and custom stations, dance and musical notes, even taxes, as well as a social organization based on kingship and a religion centered at temples with prescribed festivals and a specialized priesthood. Additionally, the existence of scribal schools and temple and royal libraries indicated astounding levels of intellectual and literary achievements. He's making that sound like a positive thing, but his whole premise is that they achieve these things by becoming slaves of the gods. So, the whole thing speaks of a system of control by the apparently superior beings. Which are still considered gods today by those who see them as such. I have to disagree with him on the idea that they got the 360-degree circle from having a base 60 counting system. I would say it's much more likely that they derived the 360-degree circle from the 365-day year, which some people maintain that it actually used to be 360 days even. And because of whatever occurrences may have happened since then, it grew into 365, which is why all the ancient cultures about 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, switched over to a 365-day calendar. But a Mayan long count, the Mayan calendar had 360 days, the Hab, and they added in 5 days later on. But all these ancient cultures used to have 360 days in their year. Then they made it 365, then 365 and a quarter. You have to wonder. I mean, they're not stupid. So why do they all have 360-day years? Because it's not going to last very long if you're 5 days off every year. So there's an argument there that the year might have actually been 360 originally. And from that you get 360 degrees in a circle, the circle of the sun. And then you break that down and you get a base 60 out of that. The Sumerologist Samuel Noah Kramer, in his trailblazing book History Begins at Sumer, 1956, described 27 of those first, including the first legal precedent, the first moral ideals, the first historian, the first love song, the first Job, and so on, all culled from Sumerian inscribed clay tablets. Actual archaeological finds and artifacts and pictorial depictions enhanced and affirm that extensive textual record. The realization in Europe and America of all that served to increase the pace of uncovering Sumer, and the more archaeologists dug, the more they found themselves facing earlier and earlier times. A site called Bismaya was excavated by an expedition of the University of Chicago. It was an ancient Sumerian city called Adab. Remains of temples and palaces were found there, with objects bearing votive inscriptions. Some identified a king of Adab named Lugal-Dalu, who reigned there circa 2500 BC. At mounds grouped already around the locally named Tel Ahamer, French archaeologists uncovered the ancient Sumerian city of Kish, with remains of 2 ziggurats. They were built of unusual convex bricks. A tablet inscribed in early Sumerian script identified the temple as dedicated to the god Ninurta, Enlil's warrior's son. The earliest ruins, dated to the very early dynastic period, included a palace of monumental size. The building was columned, a rarity in Sumer. The finds in Kish included remains of wheeled wagons and metal objects. Inscriptions identified 2 kings by their name, Mesalim and Lugal-Mu. It was later determined that they reigned at the start of the 3rd millennium BC. Excavations at Kish were resumed after World War I by Chicago's Field Museum of National History and Oxford Ashmolean Museum. Among their finds were some of the earliest examples of cylinder seal impressions. In 2004, a field museum launched a project to unify digitally on computers more than 100,000 Kish artifacts that have been dispersed between Chicago, London, and Baghdad. In the 1880s, a site called Abu Habba drew the attention of L.W. King in the British Museum when interesting tablets dug up at the site by local plunderers were offered for sale. A colleague, Theophilus Finches, correctly identified the city as ancient Sippar, the very city of the god Shamash mentioned by Berosus in the story of the flood. The site was briefly excavated by Layard's assistant Hormuz Razum. One of the best known finds there has been a large stone tablet depicting none other than the god Shamash sitting on his canopied throne. The accompanying inscriptions identified the king being presented to a god as King Nabu Apla-Iddin, who in the 9th century BC refurbished the Shamash temple in Sippar. The city's twin mounds were more thoroughly excavated in the 1890s by a joint expedition of the Dutch Orient Gesellschaft and the Ottoman Antiquities Service. They not only discovered undisturbed hoards of textual tablets shared between Berlin and Constantinople, but also some of the tablets' oldest and oddest libraries. The tablets were kept in pigeonhole compartments cut into mud brick walls, rather than as in later periods on shelves. The library's texts included tablets whose colophons explicitly stated that those were copies of text from earlier tablets coming from Nippur, from a city called Agade, and from Babylon, or found in Sippar itself. Among them were tablets belonging to the Sumerian Atrahasis text. Did that indicate that Sippar had been an early repository of writing, as the statements by Berosus have suggested? No certain answers can be given except to quote Berosus again. First, Kronos ordered Xisuthros to dig a hole and to bury all the writings about the beginnings, middles, and ends in Sippar, the city of the sun god Shamash. Then the flood survivors came back to Babylon. They dug up the writing from Sippar, found many cities, set up shrines, and once again established Babylon. Was the unique storage in cutout compartments a reminder of the digging of holes to preserve the most ancient tablets? We can only wonder. At Sippar, the tale of the deluge began to assume physical reality, but it was only the beginning. In the decade preceding the World War I, German archaeologists under the auspices of the Dutch Orient Gesellschaft began excavating at a site locally named Farah. It was an important Sumerian city called Shuruppak, which had been settled well before 3000 BC. Among its interesting features were buildings that were without doubt public facilities, some serving as schools with built-in mud brick benches. There were plenty of inscribed tablets whose contents threw light on daily life, the administration of laws, and the private ownership of houses and fields. Tablets that mirrored urban life 5,000 years ago. Inscribed tablets asserted that this Sumerian city had a pre-diluvial predecessor, a place that played a key role in the events of the deluge. The discoveries there stood out by their unusual hoard of cylinder seals, or their impressions, a unique Sumerian invention that, as the cuneiform script was in time adopted throughout the ancient lands. These were cylinders, mostly an inch or two in length, that were cut from a stone, often semi-precious, into which the artisan engraved a drawing, with or without accompanying writing. The trick was to engrave it all in reverse as a negative, so that when it was rolled on wet clay, the image was impressed as the positive. An early rotary press invention. These cylindrical works of art are called seals because that was their purpose. The seal's owner impressed it on a lump of wet clay that sealed a container of oil or wine, or on a clay envelope to seal a clay letter inside. Some seal impressions had already been found in Nagash, bearing the name of their owner, but the ones in Farah, Shuruppak, exceeded 1,300 in number, and in some cases were from the earliest times. But no less an amazing aspect of uncovering Shuruppak was its very finding. For according to Tablet 11 of the Akkadian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Shuruppak was the hometown of the Napishtim, the Noah of the deluge. It was there that the god Enki revealed to Napishtim the secret of the coming deluge and instructed him to build the salvage boat. Man of Shuruppak, son of Ubar-Tutu, tear down the house, build a ship, give up possessions, seek thou life, forswear belongings, keep soul alive. Aboard ship, take thou the seed of all living things. That ship thou shalt build, its dimensions shall be to measure. Enki, it will be recalled, was reported to have been the revealer of the god's secret decision, also in the Sumerian text mentioned earlier. The discoveries of and at Shuruppak, together with those at Sippar, transformed the deluge tale from legend and myth to a physical reality. In Divine Encounters, I have concluded, based on ancient data and modern scientific discoveries, that the deluge was a colossal tidal wave caused by the slippage of the eastern and Arctic ice sheet off that continent. Here is one of the many things where I disagree with Sitchin a great deal on. That and the whole Nibiru concept of 3,600 years, but we'll get there. World War I, from 1914 to 18, interrupted those and other archaeological explorations in the Near East, which was part of the Ottoman Empire until its dismemberment after the war. Mesopotamia was left in the hands of local excavators, both official and mostly private site robbers. Some of the finds did reach the Museum of the Ancient Orient in Constantinople, revealing that during the war years, excavations in Iraq had taken place at Abu Habab, ancient Sippar. But there was so much to uncover there that varied excavations have continued into the 70s, almost a full century after they began. A continuous and most determined series of excavations, lasting from the end of World War I until the outbreak of World War II in '39 and resumed again in '54, took place at the southern Sumerian site locally called Warka, the very Uruk of the Epic of Gilgamesh and Erech of the Bible. Adopting an excavating technique that cut a vertical shaft through all the strata, the German archaeologists of the Dutch Orient Gesellschaft were able to see at a glance the site's settlements and cultural history, from the latest settlement at the top to a beginning in the 4th millennium BC at the bottom. At all times since at least 3800 BC, it appeared every power, from Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian to Persian, Greek, and Seleucid, wanted to leave a footprint at Uruk. Uruk, it was apparent, was a special place. At Uruk, the German archaeologists found several firsts. The first item of colored pottery baked in a kiln, the first use of a potter's wheel, the first objects of metal alloys, the first cylinder seals, and the first inscriptions in the pictorial predecessor of cuneiform. Another first was a pavement made of limestone blocks, part of an unusual use of stones rather than mud bricks for construction. Unusual because the stones had to be brought from mountains situated more than 50 miles to the east. The archaeologists described some of the city's stone buildings as of monumental proportions. A massive wall surrounded the city. The archaeologists found its remains over a length of more than 10 kilometers, more than 6 miles. It embraced the city's two sections, a residential one and a sacred precinct where they discovered the earliest ziggurat. A platform raised in stages, serving as a base for a temple. By the time of its excavation, it was more like an artificial mound of no less than 7 strata of rebuilding. On top, upon an artificially made platform, there stood a temple called Ana, house or abode of Anu. It is also known to archaeologists as the White Temple because another unusual feature, a first, it was painted white. Next to the Ana were remains of 2 other temples. One painted red was dedicated to the goddess Inanna, Anu's beloved, better known by her later Akkadian name Ishtar. The other standing was a temple dedicated to the goddess Ninkarsag. Without doubt, the archaeologist's spade brought to light the city of Gilgamesh, who had reigned there circa 2750 BC, or even earlier by another chronology. The archaeologist's finds echo literally the very word of the Epic of Gilgamesh. About all his toil, he, Gilgamesh, engraved on a stone column of ramparted Uruk of the wall he built of hallowed Eanna, the pure sanctuary. Behold its outer wall, which is like a copper band, pure at its inner wall, which none can equal. Gaze upon the stone platform, which is of old. Go up and walk around on the walls of Uruk. Approach the Eanna and the dwelling of Ishtar. Kind of funny that they praise themselves for piling up rocks, or in this case bricks. I was reminded a bit ago when they were talking about the mounds, the tells. That they're like anthills. So you dig down and you find people, the remains of civilization inside the mounds. It's also kind of funny how they build towers, artificial mountains, which he said was house like a mountain or mountain house. It's funny to me that they have these mounds where people are like insects or ants inside. They praise themselves for building artificial mounds, artificial mountains, when 5,000 years later there are natural mountains built by the decay of their civilization and subsequent civilizations on top of them. Among the small finds in the 3200 to 2900 BC stratum were sculpted objects that were designated the most prized in the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. A life-size marble sculpture of a woman's head, nicknamed the Lady of Uruk, that had once been fitted with a golden headdress and eyes made of precious stones, and a large sculptured alabaster vase more than 3 feet high that depicted a procession of adherents bearing gifts to a goddess. All at once, Sumer's art of more than 5,000 years ago matched the beauty of Greek sculpture of 2,500 years later. Not quite, but it's close. This woman looks very strange without eyes, but it's getting there. At the southernmost part of Sumer, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers come together in marshlands bordering the Persian Gulf, a site locally called Abu Sarain had attracted the attention of the British Museum as early as 1854. One of its experts, J.E. Taylor, reported after preliminary diggings that the effort was unproductive of any very important results. He did bring back with him some of the unimportant finds, some mud bricks with writing on them. 50 years later, 2 French Assyriologists determined from those bricks that the site was ancient Eridu. Its name meant house in the faraway built. Faraway built house. And it was Sumer's first city. That may be of some importance to some people, maybe. It took 2 world wars and the time in between for the first methodical and continuous archaeological excavations to take place at the site, under the auspices of the Iraqi Directorate General of Antiquities. As the archaeologists dug away occupation stratum after occupation stratum, from the latest on top to the earliest at the bottom, they uncovered no less than 17 levels above the first one. They could count time backwards as they kept excavating: 2500 BC, 2800, 3000, 3500. When the spades reached the foundations of Eridu's first temple, the date was circa 4000 BC. Below that, the archaeologists struck virgin mud soil. The city's original temple, which had been rebuilt time and time again, was constructed of fired mud bricks and rose upon an artificial level platform. The central hall was rectangular in shape, flanked on its 2 longer sides by a series of smaller rooms, a model of other temples in millennia to come. At one end there was a pedestal, perhaps for a statue. At the other end, a podium created an elevated area. The astounded excavators discovered there, at levels 6 and 7, large quantities of fish bones mixed with ashes, leading to the suggestion that fish were offered there to the gods. Oh great, the first incarnation of Dagon. Well, that's the deification of Noah, what it is. The excavators should not have been puzzled And that may be what Enki actually is, if you think about it. He's the water god. The excavators should not have been puzzled. The temple was dedicated to the Sumerian Ea, whose name meant he whose home is water. It was he, as his autobiography and many other texts make clear, who had waded ashore from the Persian Gulf at the head of 50 Anunnaki spacemen who had come to Earth from their planet. Customarily depicted with outpoured streams of water, it was he who was the legendary Oannes. In time, as explained in the preamble of the Atrahasis epic, Ea was granted the epithet Enki, Lord of the Earth, and it was he who had alerted Utnapishtim, the Asudra, of the coming deluge, instructing him to build a waterproof boat and be saved. You know, it just occurred to me that Enki may actually himself be the deification of Noah, and that them coming ashore from the Persian Gulf would just be when Noah's Ark came ashore when the waters receded. Because he supposedly built a large enough boat that it would have been an ocean-going vessel. They compare it, it's comparable in size to ocean liners circa 1900. So it was definitely capable of being an ocean-borne craft. And that's interesting. I haven't really thought of it that way, that Enki himself might be the deification of Noah and not just Dagon and other later Phoenician gods, etc. Things like Poseidon or Neptune. With this Enki would be the original version of Poseidon. And of course Oannes, I believe, is the one that later on became Odin. That's interesting. Though wholly unintended, the unearthing of Eridu opened the way to archaeological confirmation of one of Sumer's most basic myths, the coming of the Anunnaki to Earth and the establishment by them of the cities of the gods in pre-diluvial times. It was in 1914 that one of the early Sumerologists, Arno Pobel, made known the astounding contents of a tablet kept in a fragment box, cataloged CBS 10673, in the collection of the Philadelphia University Museum. Less than half preserved, this remainder of the original Sumerian deluge record provides on the obverse side the bottom part of the first three columns of the text, and turned over retains on the reverse the upper part of columns 4 to 6. The extant lines in the latter section relate how Ziusudra had been forewarned by the god Enki about the deluge and the boat he was instructed to build, how the deluge had raged for 7 days and 7 nights, and how the gods, led by Enlil, granted Ziusudra life like a god, thus is named he of prolonged life days. The obverse, columns 1 to 3, however, considerably expand the tale. The text describes the circumstances of the deluge and the events that preceded it. Indeed, the text harks back to the time when the Anunnaki had come to Earth and settled in the Aedean, a tale that has led some to call this text the Eridu Genesis. It was in those early days when the Anunnaki brought kingship down from heaven. The text asserts in column 2 that 5 cities of the gods were founded. After the blank of kingship was brought down from heaven, after the lofty crown and throne of kingship were lowered from heaven, and there are blank spaces, perfected the, founded the cities in, gave them their names, allocated their pure places. The first of these cities, Eridu, to the leader Nudimmud was given, the second Badtabira he gave to Nugig, the third Larak to Pabilsag was given, The fourth Sipar he gave to the hero Utu. The hero Utu. The fifth Surupak to Sud was given, or it should be Sud. Utu is the same as Shamash in the Babylonian text. If you have Enki being Noah, and this is the reestablishment of cities after the flood, Utu is Shamash. Shamash, I submit, I've always contended, was the brother of Shem, who made his own priesthood and called himself Shamash. Shamash became the sun god. Okay, Shem was the Melchizedek, but he was not the firstborn. His brother, in the Bible called Ham, was the firstborn. He thought he should have the priesthood, so he made his own. And he referred back to this image that they made of the sun god Utu, or Shamash, under his canopied throne. That's the one where he's like 3 times as tall as everybody else. He's one of the giants. And he's just sitting there. He's on his throne, or it looks more like a box. But he's sitting down. It may be the Ark of the Covenant, who knows. He's sitting down, and these guys, his attendants, or whoever they are, coming up to him, are only half as tall as he is when he's sitting down. These are the antediluvial, what's called Nephilim, by Christian proponents of the Nephilim theory. But these guys, they are not what the Christians are saying that they are, which is the mixture of the races of what's called the demons, or fallen angels, and humans. It's actually what humans used to be before the flood. The whole world was different. Everything was giant back then. Anyway, my point is that that makes sense. What I said about Enki being Noah actually makes sense in the context of what else I've theorized before. I just haven't ever thought of it exactly that way. Never really occurred to me. Because you think of Enki as being like a Mercury type, like Hermes. Enki is the Sumerian version of Hermes. Now Hermes was the deification of Enoch, more or less. But I mean that's Greek, and the farther you go down through time, the more convoluted everything becomes, the more mixed up they get. The various gods take on all the other attributes of other gods, and they just kind of all get mixed together, and it just becomes kind of watered down. Stories get retold and changed, and new ones are invented and brought in. Next thing you know, you have Hesiod's theogony. The disclosure that sometime after they had arrived on Earth, but long before the deluge, the Anunnaki established 5 settlements is a major revelation. That the cities' names and names of their god rulers are stated. Now he's saying this is before the deluge. I would say it's long after. If you're going to put the deluge at 10,000 BC anyway, he tries to make all this stuff 400,000 years ago, and that to me is just way too far back. But if you have a civilization, say Atlantis, about 12,000 years ago, and then you have the destruction of that world, that civilization 10,000 years ago, or 10,000 BC, then you have some survivors of it in boats, and they come ashore being deified by the, I guess, the new inhabitants. Because there would be time in between. Say there's a contingent of survivors from the Atlantean world that were the original humans, the Adamic race. Then you have the spliced, which this is the inversion from what most Christians, other Christians would say, that the demons mated with humans and made giants. No, we were the giants, and the demons spliced their DNA with ours, and we became dwarves by comparison. Or if you want to say they mated with us, then that union did not produce giants who were superhuman. What it did was reduce the aspect of humanity that we had, and our DNA became reduced by those so-called fallen angels, and they produced modern man, Homo sapiens. It's the exact inversion. Everything that they tell us is reversed. It's all inverted. It's inverted reality. And that is the same with this Nephilim stuff that they are pushing. It's also reversed. And so these so-called gods are just the giants from before, but they're not Nephilim. The Nephilim are the regular-sized people that came after. The cities' names and names of their god rulers are stated, and it is quite astounding. But what is even more amazing about the list of cities and the gods is that 4 of their sites have been found and excavated by modern archaeologists, with the exception of Larak, whose remains have not been identified through its approximate location, or though its approximate location has been ascertained. Eridu, Bad Tabira, Sippar, and Surupak have been found. Thus, as Sumer, its cities and its civilization have been brought back to light, not only the deluge, but events and places from before the deluge emerged as historical reality. Since the Mesopotamian texts assert that the deluge devastated the earth and all upon it, one may well ask how those cities were still extant after the deluge. For that answer, provided by the same Mesopotamian text, we have to pull away the curtains of time and obscurity and reveal the full story of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. As before, it will be the ancient texts themselves that will tell the story. Well, my solution would be that they were built after the deluge, like I just said. That's a simple solution. And as for the Anunnaki, I believe the literal translation of that word, I forget what it was supposed to be. I've heard his definition so much, those who from heaven to earth came, but it really just means like the lofty ones or the holy ones. And it's of my personal opinion that this is the original form of the word Elohim. And when you read Elohim in the Bible, like when it says the Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image," the Elohim is the Hebrew equivalent of the Sumerian Anunnaki, because it is talking about the Anunna gods, and the Ki is just the word for earth. Anu is heaven, Ki is earth. So you have the Anunna gods, as they are called, gods of heaven, or the heavens, the stars. It also reminds me of the Duran key, the bond between heaven and earth. So it's these Anunna gods who gave, it says, kingship to mankind. And the priesthood as well, because early on you had priest kings. And with that you had the Duran key, or the bond between heaven and earth, of which they were in charge over. And like I mentioned the Ark of the Covenant before, I'm fairly certain that the Ark of the Covenant was some kind of latter-day rendition or perhaps vestigial remnant of the original Duron key device. And that's the end of chapter 4. So I guess I will cut it off here. Take it easy.